All right, looks like we should be coming online in just a moment here. So welcome to the channel if this is your first time here, or welcome in general just to the stream for today, especially if you've been here for a while. Thank you very much for joining me today. We're going to be getting into what's going on in the Ukraine war. It's been about 2.5, 3 days since my last stream. It's been very busy over here, but I did finally get a little bit of time together to be able to jump in and get the latest for the last several days here. So let's go ahead and get straight into it with what I think is probably the biggest news of the about last 3 days, and that is the big old POW swap that they pulled off just over on the 3rd, I believe it was. Yes, January 3rd. So let's go ahead and switch over there, and you can take a look at what's going on here. Let's see. I know there's a bunch of audio to that, so let me go ahead and mute that for you. The 230 soldiers were returned from Russian captivity to Ukraine. That includes soldiers, sergeants, and officers, and these are like the defenders of Azovstal, Mariupol, Snake Island. All of these types of people, these have returned once again home. And let me tell you, it's quite an emotional situation. According to the Institute for the Study of War, there was this large exchange, and the timing is really interesting. It could be that Russia is trying to come off as being an international, compliant with international law, trying to show off the good treatment of the POWs. But that's after they've already announced their POW, their Ukrainian soldiers battalion that they have basically, conscripted into Russian service. That's after there's been a lot of video of the abuses they've been putting out recently. So it's not really clear why this large exchange happened right now, considering how recalcitrant Russia has been lately. More than 248 Russian military personnel were returned as well. So the exchange is roughly 1-to-1, not quite, but close. So the overall exchange seems to have gone for both sides in that regard. And with those soldiers returning home, they'll be able to get the medical treatment they need, the rehabilitation they need. Some of them may return to the front lines again, though I doubt all. But overall, you're looking at some families that are being reunited and some people that are coming home. Some pictures of the men that were exchanged here, the Ukrainian men, and let me tell you, the looks on their faces, they're almost shocked that they were not forgotten, that the country is still in the fight, that they're welcomed home. And that's what I think is the most important thing of this, is that these are people who wanted to come home, that were desperate to come home and desired to return to their country they love. There's a soldier who is making that first phone call to his mother. He's 22 years old. He was one of the youngest defenders of Snake Island and was captured right at the beginning of the invasion. So he's been gone nearly 2 years with no contact with his family. And he is talking on the phone here, and you can see the text. I'm not going to read it out here. But you can see the look on his face and the emotional impact here. And again, there's nothing you can say about this. One of the Ukrainian defenders declared, "We're home. You haven't forgotten about us." The United Arab Emirates were instrumental. I do not know what that explosion was in the background. Probably fireworks, considering the time of year. But don't worry about it. I'm perfectly safe over here. These soldiers are getting their first taste of freedom in 2 years. And most of them have no clue what has been going on for the last 2 years. As far as they were probably conformed, the Ukraine was probably falling even as they sat moldering away in a Russian cell with poor rations, poor treatment, etc. Helena was a combat medic for the 36th Marine Brigade. She went through a bunch of battles with her Marine boyfriend over in Mariupol. They were both taken captive while leaving Azovstal. However, they have been exchanged and returned to Ukraine. And just the next day, they got engaged. So it's, I think war changes your perspective. I don't know this myself, but from what I've seen, war changes your perspective on what's important in life. These are the names of the soldiers who've been exchanged. Obviously, they're in Cyrillic, but that is a lot of names that are home once again and ready to be back with their families. Another piece of news that not quite so emotional, but Ukrainian operatives put fire to a Su-34 jet fighter over in Chelyabinsk, Russia. That's right, over in the Ural Mountains. This is well away from the main combat zones. They snuck onto an airfield and set fire to a Su-34 fighter, which burned down right there on the tarmac. The interesting thing is I caught some other sources that were saying that they cut a hole in the chain link fence, meandered on through and torched a fighter with no issues. And now they're going through, the Russians are going through an investigation as to what happened. It sounds like some heads are going to roll because that's an expensive piece of equipment to have go up in smoke over effectively a couple of guys with a little bit of wire cutters and a little bit of gasoline being able to set fire to a jet. Over in Crimea, it has been loud the last few days. In fact, it's just yesterday and into today. You can see here from Null Reports the various places that have had reports of drones being shot down and attacks being taken out on them. That goes all the way to Novorossiysk, which is on the far right side there, and it is in Russian territory proper. So there have been attacks all across Crimea and the south of Russia in just the last 24 hours. This, of course, is interesting for a couple of reasons, but the main one is that it's actually Kirilo Budanov's birthday yesterday, and there were attacks all across Crimea for that day, and it sounds like even if he didn't arrange it, somebody knew when his birthday was and decided that they wanted to give him a special happy birthday. The Ukrainian military officials reported that they successfully struck at least one military target in occupied Crimea, whereas the Russians have been claiming, oh no, not successful at all. For this initial attack, they did report that a military warehouse was destroyed in Crimea. They've also reported that the radar system in Yevpatoria has been also destroyed. The ammunition warehouses were in Pervomaisk in Russian-occupied Crimea. The Russians claim to have shot down 36 Ukrainian drones during the attack, but explosions were heard all across Crimea, of course, including Novorossiysk, which I mentioned, Krim, Relay, and a bunch of other locations across Crimea, which if we look at that map one more time, you can see Zankoy, Feodosia, Kerch, Sevastopol, and Saki. So all across Crimea, really hit them hard right there. Then additional reports have come out that Ukraine struck a Russian command post at the same time. And some reports have been coming in stating that 23 soldiers were killed in that action, including 5 senior officers on command staff. Some sources have forwarded that General Gerasimov himself was there. I don't put any stock in those, but just be advised if you're looking over there that if people will be reporting that Gerasimov may have perished in this strike right here, no confirmation, no good information, but just be advised on it. Uh, Crimean Wind did report the 23 of its troops were hit. 23 of Russian troops were hit, including the 5 high-ranking officers and 9 special forces soldiers. The Russian channels have been complaining about the lack of Russian air defense for the area and how weak it is these days. Again, I'm not putting great stock in these exact numbers. Just be advised that there was some kind of a strike and there was some kind of soldiers taken out in the strike. Let me get this where it's a little bit easier to see here. There were several strikes overall in Crimea, not just a single one that took place. And they literally were it was an all-day affair. Really, it was. The radar station in Evpatoria was also hit, and they said it was hit by a rocket, with smoke now coming from the facility. Again, by hitting the radar facilities, it makes the next attacks easier, and of course makes any of the Russian defenses harder to use. So each radar that gets taken out means one more hole that they can sneak a drone through, or a missile through, or a cruise missile through. And as I mentioned, there was a bunch of air defense activity in Novorossiysk. No official reports I've seen on exactly what may or may not have been hit. That could just be air defense systems operating in that area. Now we're going to move over to missiles. And before I do, in fact, let me just take a brief pause here so I can get a drink of water and give you a chance to chime in if you're watching today's video. Absolutely let me know. And if you have questions, hit me up with those as well. All right, moving on. The next most important news I think came out of the last 24 hours is basically Russia has been getting more armaments and missiles from other countries. They're planning to buy some from Iran. They're making those negotiations, putting those negotiations together. They've also already confirmed that North Korean missiles have struck Ukraine. Obviously not launched from North Korea. They've been launched by Russia into Ukraine. There's a bunch of options for what they could be shooting, including warheads that can carry up to 690 kilometers. And they're in better characteristics than the Russian Iskander missiles. It makes you wonder how Russia's hardware has gotten so behind the times. 1980s and 1990s tech, U.S. tech or Western tech, is easily intercepting Russia's latest and greatest. And on top of that, it looks like North Korea has been doing a better job of producing, ballistic missiles than Russia has. The attacks in Kharkiv were done by those foreign-made North Korean missiles. And the National Security Council the U.S. National Security Council has confirmed that the North Korean the North Korean missiles have already been used in Ukraine. Now, the Institute for the Study of War talks about this a little bit further, saying Russia may be intensifying these efforts to source ballistic missiles from abroad because these missiles appear to be more effective at striking targets in Ukraine in some circumstances. Now, every North Korean missile that gets launched into Ukraine results in data for the Russians and the North Koreans to improve their missile production. On the other hand, every missile that's launched into Ukraine also gives the United States and Western powers more data on exactly how their systems deal with these missiles. Now, since they were striking Kharkiv with these missiles, it indicates that it's unlikely that any of the Western systems were close enough to immediately intercept, because the Kharkiv region is super close to the Russian territories. That means that Russia's not really convinced they're going to get all the way into, say, Kyiv or something like that. But overall, this is this appears to have been an opportunity for Russia to get some additional hardware by giving over basically technical advisors, that type of thing. It's a bad situation is what it is. Here's some of the remains of the missiles that hit in Kharkiv on January 2nd. Russian sources kind of got a little bit up in arms, saying that they had been struck by Ukrainian forces in Belgorod targeting civilians. And some of them started, some of the Russians started posting videos showing these evil, Ukrainian missiles, the remains of them having struck in Belgorod. Turns out they were the remains of Panzer S-1 air defense missiles. And so they deleted those videos. Of course, the internet's forever. War Translated, Dmitry over there, was complaining that the North Koreans could give Russia 460-kilometer range missiles, but we're not doing anything. The Western powers aren't giving anything close to that range for the 2 years of this war. The UN Security Council is going to meet over North Korea supplying these missiles to Russia. Understand that Russia has already signed on to a UN Security Council resolution that forbade North Korea from importing or exporting battle tanks, armored combat vehicles, large caliber artillery systems, warships, combat aircraft, attack helicopters, missiles, or missile systems. So the agreement by Russia to not do these things and to engage in that type of a blockade of North Korea, it's not worth the paper that's in there. Not worth the powder to blow it up. Russia's word is worthless. And that's the big stories from the last 3 days here. Between the POWs being returned, the jet that got torched over in Chelyabinsk, the missile attacks on Crimea that took out a radar system, a headquarters, and a ammunition warehouse, and now the fact that Russia is so desperate for hardware, they're going to not just Iran for drones, but now for missiles, and they're already using North Korean ballistic missiles in Ukraine. Brief pause. If you want to chime in, now's a good time. All right, let's move over to news out of Ukraine. Ukraine's prime minister stated that they were going to have a 6-fold increase in the output of their defense industrial base in Ukraine in 2024. They note that the capacity to produce had tripled in 2023 compared to 2022, and they need more drones, shells, ammunition, and armored vehicles for Ukrainian forces. There was a scheme, apparently, that the Security Service of Ukraine managed to uncover of helping Ukrainians of draft age escape into Transnistria, a Russian-occupied region in Moldova. Now, if you're Ukrainian, the last place you want to escape to is anywhere that is controlled by Russia. And the Transnistria region is fully controlled by Russia, guarded by Russia. It's got Russian soldiers there. It's not a good idea. But then again, if you're that dumb, maybe you belong over there. I don't know. There are still talks in play, I should say. The new mobilization law, it's still going through the legislative process. We'll see what comes out in the end. I know they've made a lot of changes to make it more robust and more legal, constitutional from their perspective, etc. So there's a lot of things still going on in the mobilization law. Interesting here is that over 220 soldiers have surrendered through the I Want to Live hotline since September of 2022. Considering the situation over there, that's pretty good numbers for basically a little bit more than a year of operation. There's still about 1,000 requests pending that they're working on, but overall, it's interesting that in this modern warfare, people can pick up a cell phone, call up and say, hey, I want to surrender, as opposed to having to wave the white flag. Not that they don't do that as well. A spy for Russia was sentenced to 12 years in prison in Donetsk. This person who had spied on Ukrainian military positions and reported them to Russia. He was found guilty of collaboration and sentenced to that 12 years. We've seen a lot of this person was arrested, but never really seen a lot of the follow-ups on what they actually received for a sentence. 12 years in this case. A frontline plant operated by DTEC, that would be a power plant, was struck again on January 4th. And the report is that although no deaths amongst the workers, there were 5 injured, and the plant itself had a significant amount of damage. So that may be a while before that is able to get back operational and produce power again. So it's been a while since Ukraine has managed to up their international reserves. They're now up to $40.5 billion worth of international currency reserves. They had a high in July of 2023, but then dropped for 4 months in a row. But it looks like they're getting back together and they're getting their economy back in shape. And Ukraine's exports are expected to grow by 9% in 2024. All right, let's move over to news out of Russia. We'll just go and keep on going. Russia seems to be setting up they call it the information conditions, according to the Institute for the Study of War, to blame the West for a potential future conflict in the Arctic. This is very much how Russia operates. They set up the narrative that everything that happens is all the West's fault. It's not their fault. It's not their fault they invaded Ukraine. It's all the West's fault. They're the ones that made it so Russia had to do it. Now they're setting up a similar situation over in the Arctic. They've been working on a similar one in the Baltics. Get back over here. Okay, sorry about that. They've been setting up a similar one in the Baltics as well, and potentially with Finland and Norway and those areas as well. It's clear that they're very bellicose right now. They want to be in a war state. They want to be in a winning war state, and they're annoyed that they're not outright stomping the world and people aren't rolling over for them. They're bullies, is what it is. Vladimir Putin did approve in November of 22 the establishment of the Moscow Government Security Force, which was at the time a new organization to guard the capital's infrastructure. From July 2023 on, they assumed a more paramilitary character, including receiving a remit to use firearms. It has likely attracted several thousand recruits out of a planned strength of 15,000. This basically is setting up another, like a Wagner group, a PMC, and it provides the opportunities for people in Moscow to serve without being on the front line. They may regret that decision eventually if it turns out that Vladimir Putin decides he needs those soldiers. There have been reports that Russia has been increasing the intensity of their long-range strike operations. Kind of a duh now, since this is talking about stuff from all the way back on the 29th of December. The targets seem to be Ukraine's defense industry, which is a contrast because Russia had been targeting things like power plants and civilian infrastructure. Not that they have stopped that entirely, because it's clear they're targeting some civilian structures. But rather than focusing on power plants, except for as targets of opportunity, it looks more like they're trying to, at this point in time, actually strike places that are producing military hardware. They actually did hit a factory that made, I believe it was military clothing, and did successfully hit that and do significant damage to the building. Apparently, if you want to be part of the big Russian world, all you got to do is sign up to fight in Ukraine and you'll get Russian citizenship. So if you're looking to be a part of Russia, go volunteer as a foreign fighter, you'll be on your way to that coveted Russian passport. There have been several blackouts in the Moscow region recently. A fire at a substation caused power outages yesterday, And my understanding is that not only did that happen yesterday, but they've been out of power all through today as well. That means in freezing temperatures, people without heat, light, or any kind of ability to communicate. Bloomberg has reported that Russia is facing challenges in oil exports. Apparently 14 tankers have stopped, turned around, or had to disable their tracking systems while transporting oil to or from India. Means that they're really trying their best to evade these sanctions, and they're not being as successful as they had hoped to be. An unexploded piece of ordnance was found in Belgorod, and 600 people had to be evacuated. Now, I did not look into this one in detail any further. It's going to be in Russian, so bear with me a second to get this translated. There was some munitions found on Krasno. I'm not even going to bother trying to read the street name. It's right there if you want to try. And they're working on disposal. It makes me wonder if one of their air defense missiles managed to fall without actually exploding. Okay, yeah, here is the information on the apartment still being without power since it was yesterday. So, a lot of trouble over there for Russia in restoring their own power infrastructure. Now, there's no indications that this was a Ukrainian attack. And if they can't even handle it when it's not a Ukrainian attack, what's that tell you about the state of Russia's true infrastructure over there? Let's go ahead and move on to international. Belgium has sent a couple of F-16s to Denmark for Ukrainian pilots to train on. They're also going to send 50 training personnel as well. There's been some... Okay, this is one that's just kind of weird. There's going to be apparently an event in Italy that's sponsored by a pro-Russian group that's supposed to be celebrating the rebirth of Mariupol. And it's going to be the thing is, it's going to happen in Italy. This is clearly a Russian information operation. They've done some reconstruction, basically fast, dirty work that quickly got something that looks pretty on certain areas, but still vast parts of Mariupol itself are little more than rubble, like the picture you see here. Apparently, they were going to do an event celebrating this reconstruction and in Italy, and now people are throwing an absolute snit fit over it, trying to get the Italians to prevent it from happening. A Kyrgyzstan citizen was sentenced to 5 years in prison for participating in the war of Ukraine as part of Wagner Group. It is illegal for Kyrgyzstan citizens to participate in wars in other countries, and therefore, when they go back to Kyrgyzstan, they're going to be arrested, tried, and sentenced. In this case, 5 years in prison. There are rumblings that the U.S. may not be able to support Ukraine at the same level as 2022 and 2023. That's a very bad political situation that is dramatically impacting the war front here. And while I believe that America will still be supporting Ukraine for some time, if they're not able to step it up and are having to step it down instead, it's not going to be good for Ukraine. American-trained F-16 pilots are expected. American-trained Ukrainian F-16 pilots are expected to finish their training by the end of 2024. Others have said it would take about 8 months, which would mean about August, September timeframe. So you can see some various situations there. There's already some that are pretty well advanced in their training. I wonder if they might may be able to advance that training a little bit more, get them out faster. Germany has sent the Skynex air defense system and other military aid to Ukraine. They've also added 10 Marder fighting vehicles, ammunition, and other aid as well. Sorry, I already talked about that one. This is one that's got me a little bit extra concerned. The IAEA reports that they are being prevented from accessing 3 of the reactor hulls at Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This is the first time they've not been granted access to a reactor hall of a unit that was in cold shutdown. That gives me vibes of Russia's trying to do something in those reactors. Are they trying to heat them back up? Are they trying to turn them back on? Are they trying to sabotage them? What exactly is Russia doing over there at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that they don't want the IAEA to see? I'm worried about it. In a situation that's causing a tremendous amount of actual safety issues, Russia has been jamming GPS signals, likely out of Kaliningrad. Now, Kaliningrad is not that close to Ukraine. In fact, let me see, there's Moldova. Yeah, it's not that close to Ukraine at all. But if they are jamming it through that entire area, that large circle you see there, that would mean civilian flights would have to rely on old school navigation methods through that area to make sure that they stay on the right course, stay at the right places, and get to where they're supposed to be going. It's a real safety issue with this jamming of GPS well outside of the combat zone. I found this one interesting. Since 2022, more than 40,000 Russian citizens have crossed into the United States asking for asylum. Now, this post on Twitter/X goes into the smugglers who offer services like this, including writing your asylum request, getting fake character witnesses or fake witnesses to your oppression, getting all the paperwork done, greasing the skids, bribery, etc., etc., etc. This is big business, and it really concerns me. If there's legitimate asylum requests, I want those to go through. The problem is that there are bad actors who are flooding the U.S. southern border with as many as they can to try and overwhelm the system and cause its utter collapse. That's a topic for another day, but 40,000 Russians trying to get into the U.S. over a 2-year period, pretty unusual. All right, let's take a brief pause before I move on to the situation on the front lines. Pro tip, or I should say a bit of a sneak peek here. Not a lot of changes. There have been a few, but not a lot. All right, let's go ahead and get into things here. I'm going to do a quick overview of the area here. Ukraine managed to push the Russians back from Sinkiivka significantly and reopen this territory. Let me get you the view so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. I managed to get this area right here back under control. There have been some Russian reports saying that they've managed to get into the outskirts of the town. I have seen no actual confirmation of that. And so right now, the information is that they've pushed them back at Sinkiivka. I'll watch to see if anything further comes out. No changes along this part of the front lines to speak of. It's not until we really get to, Bodanivka, which there's been gradual progress over the last several days, getting into this area right here. That happened during our last video, no major changes. Let's see, what are we on right here? We are on the 4th. That'll be yesterday's information. Let's just do a quick refresh and see if there's anything new. There is. I'll just front line clarified. Nothing new then. I mean, they've changed. Whenever they do that, that means there have been information that they weren't able to really get down and dirty with and figure out. There is some situation over here in Pervomaisk here, which is just south of Avdiivka, that Ukraine has managed to push the Russians back. There we go. You can see that's just pushing them back across that little waterway right there. A natural barrier and one that they definitely would want to protect. The Russians, let me get this back pulled out a little bit here. Near Kromova, I was just talking about this area a moment ago. Had a little bit more progress in this area here. Managed to get in front of this water right here. They're going through, this would be high ground right up in here somewhere. So should be something important to keep an eye on. Let's see if we can get a topographic here. There we go. Nope, nope, nope. Not that. Okay, we'll just go back to the default view. But overall, they're making gradual nibbles at the front lines and managing to make some progress there. Some reports of a change here. Oh, that's right. Here we go. Near Avdiivka on the north end, but they've stopped trying to push towards Stepova. That seems to be basically a stop, literally a dead stop in that area. They did manage to get a little bit more territory, but looks like it's mostly open territory right here. This just widens this front line a little bit more and puts more pressure on Ukrainian forces through this area. No major changes all through this area, but when we get over here, I did see, and I've not seen any lines on this just yet, that the Ukrainians have managed to push to make some additional advances towards Verbova, somewhere in this area right here. Again, I don't have good visuals on exactly where, but that is the information I've gotten so far, is that the Ukrainians have managed to make some additional pushes here. And I do have an update on Crimea that I'll get to in just a little bit. Let's go ahead and keep on moving as it is. The lines really haven't changed, but interesting stuff. Oh, crud. My translation's gone poof here, so hang on a second while I do a quick dad-style translation here. Okay, yeah, this is the report on the command post in Crimea right here. We can just keep on going. I originally was planning to talk about it in the front line section, but I talked about it during the Crimea section instead. The commander of the Southern Forces, Brigadier General Oleksiy Tarnovsky, reported that Russia has doubled their attacks in the southeastern sector. That'd be over near Donetsk in that area. They're trying to basically, they're trying to gain the initiative over there. They want to get Ukraine entirely on the defensive and being pushed back. And so far, they're making small nibbles of progress, but not successfully doing that. Ukraine has claimed that they did a cross-border raid on Russian positions in Belgorod Oblast. Apparently, there was a report that Russian commanders were inspecting positions there, and so they went ahead and run across the border to do an attack. I don't believe this was a sustained attack. I think it was a hit and run, for lack of a better way to say it. They weren't trying to hold that territory. But if they managed to get in there and get maybe get at least intel, or maybe even take out some of the leadership, that'd be a positive for Ukraine. Let me see if we can get any information here from the article itself. Does say that the Russians claimed that at least 24 people were killed in Belgorod. So, interesting. Very interesting indeed to see what Ukraine is doing on the fly. So I already talked about that. Here's an interesting little tidbit right here. Ukraine has designed a new combat robot called the D-11, which they can put on a machine gun turret over here. Let me see if I can pull that up and use it to assault positions. They can use it to carry supplies to the front lines. They can do a lot of stuff with this, do surveillance, everything. Interesting little bit of tech that they're using. Okay, now this is the situation over at Crimea. And I remember enough about this that I don't need to bust through the translation here. But the thing is that the Russians have thrown everything, including the kitchen sink, at this area and have not successfully managed to push the Ukrainians off their little foothold in Crimea. So they are saying, this is from the Russian side, that they're expecting around the 20th of January a large-scale crossing of the Dnieper by Ukrainian armed forces. That's including, they've noticed an increase in the number of boats, a lot more soldiers and equipment coming in that area. They're watching everything going on, and they believe that there will be a large-scale crossing of the Dnieper on or about the 20th of January. Is it true? I don't know. It's coming from the Russian side. So interesting if nothing else, but maybe you keep an eye on the Crimea area later this month. And that's the situation on the front lines as I know it today. I'm going to go straight into the extras right here. From Michael McFall, who was a former ambassador to Russia back in 2012 to 2014 timeframe. He talks about the Budapest Memorandum and the resultant situation there. He says, we disarmed Ukraine in 1994. We gave Ukraine hardly any arms after Putin invaded in 2014. We failed to deter Putin's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. We cannot fail Ukraine again by delaying military aid any longer in 2024. We're better than that. And the problem is that, unfortunately, it appears that that's exactly what the U.S. is doing, is that they are failing at this. And I put out a whole video on whether we would keep our word to Ukraine in this, because we promised to provide for their defense. That doesn't mean we had to fight personally for it, but we promised we'd provide for their territorial integrity and their defense. And now 30 years later, when that promise is being called in, we are not honorable to that promise. The U.S. is. It really makes me mad. If you can't rely on the U.S. to keep its word, especially in this world today, who can you? A video of the situation in Soledar. This would be before the Russian army liberated Soledar. Technology, a thriving city, etc. Obviously, silly things happening, and people and life. Johnny, I do see you over there. Thank you for joining. Glad you're here, and thank you for your comment. Absolutely. Then you got the Soledar after Russia liberated it. A ruined, muddy mess. That is the way the Russian world visits. This one also, I'm going to end off today with this one right here. In fact, let me see if I can get this big enough to read. I might even get myself off the screen. In fact, I will. Bear with me a second here. Let's go and do this. Nope, can't do it. Dang it. Okay. I'll tell you the story then that's going on right here. This a helicopter crew, Ukrainian helicopter crew, every time they flew out, a little girl would run out of her farm and wave at them as they passed. And every time they'd go by, she would be out there waving at them, saying and waving at them as they went by. So the helicopter pilots thought, you know what, that's so cute. So on the way back, they dropped a care package with candy in it for the little girl. And it reminded me so much of the Berlin airlift right after World War II. When the Berlin Wall was going up and Russia had cut off the Berlin sector, the U.S., British, and French sectors of Berlin from resupply from the outside world. And the cargo pilots were flying in enough supplies to resupply that city, basically everything they needed: food, fuel, everything. And one of the pilots started dropping little parachutes with candy bars out the window, and it was so popular that all the pilots started doing it, and it was like a huge PR coup. But it also was a little sliver of hope for the people of Berlin. And I wonder if that is how that little girl feels right now. She was waving at those pilots as they went by, and they provided her a little bit of candy. That's really everything for today, though. Is there any questions before I close up shop for today? Go ahead and chime in right now. I'll take a quick drink of my water, and that'll give you enough time to chime in if you'd like to. All right, seeing none, let's see. F-16s being in. I've heard the rumors about the F-16s being in Ukraine already. I do not believe them to be true. If there are, then there are non-Ukrainian pilots operating them. Now, there have been a few things happening that do not have an easy explanation that does not involve a combat aircraft. That said, there are explanations that do work for them. I don't believe if they are there yet. That said, I could also be entirely wrong. Always possible. They were kind of rumored around for a little bit, and those rumors have died out. I don't think they're true, personally. But I'd be happy to be wrong. All right. Thank you very much for joining me today, Johnny, especially for commenting. I really appreciate you being here. I'm going to go ahead and close it up for today. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.